There is a seed rack in every hardware store in America, and something on it is prohibited where you live. Not the exotic thing you would expect. A packet with a photograph of a flower on the front, sitting between the beans and the sunflowers, stocked by a chain that has no idea which states it is shipping into. 20 of these seeds carry real restrictions in this country. A handful sit on the Federal Register, where moving them across a state line without a permit is a genuine offense. 2 of them will kill a person who eats them, and 1 is the single most harmless-looking purchase. In American gardening, sold by the million every spring, and the most likely thing in this entire video, to put an illegal plant in your ground. Seed law works differently from plant law, and almost nobody knows the difference. Before you order anything this winter, it is worth understanding which is which. 20. Castor bean. Enormous palm-shaped leaves in deep burgundy or bronze, veined red, on a stem that can put on 8 feet in a single summer. Nurseries sell it as a tropical accent for the back of a border, and it earns that reputation honestly. Nothing else grows that fast from a spring sowing. The seed is the problem. Ricinus communis produces spiny pods, holding mottled beans that look remarkably like ticks, and those beans contain ricin. A small number chewed and swallowed is enough to kill an adult, and children are drawn to them because they look like something out of a jewelry box. Restriction here is patchy rather than federal. Some municipalities prohibit it, some states list it, and plenty of places have no rule at all. What actually happens to you is usually nothing legal, and the risk is not legal anyway. Swallowed whole, the beans mostly pass through intact because the toxin sits inside a hard coat. Chewed is another matter entirely. If you grow it, cut the seed heads off before they ripen. 19. Datura. Sold under prettier names than its own. Moonflower, Engel's trumpet, devil's trumpet, depending on who is writing the label. Large white or violet trumpets that open at dusk and pour out scent for a single night, then collapse by morning. It comes with a spiny seed pod that splits to release dozens of dark seeds, and it self-sows aggressively. Every part of the plant contains tropane alkaloids. Hospitals see poisonings every year, mostly from people deliberately experimenting, and the margin between a dose that does something and a dose that kills is unpredictable even between 2 pods on the same plant. Some cities and counties prohibit cultivation outright. Most do not, and it stays in catalogs. What actually happens to you comes down to where you live, and whether anyone is looking, which is essentially never. The plant will still be in your borders in 5 years, because those pods do not stop. 18. Paulovnia, the princess tree, and the online advertising for it is relentless. Grow your own timber. Fastest growing hardwood on earth. 15 feet in a season. Harvest in 7 years. Plantation returns from your backfield. Some of that is true. Paulovnia genuinely grows at a startling rate, and the timber is genuinely light and strong. What the advertisement omits is the seed. A single mature tree produces something in the region of 20 million winged seeds a year, fine enough to travel on wind for miles, and they germinate on bare rock, road cuttings, and cleared ground. It has spread through the Appalachians and across the eastern states from exactly this kind of planting. Connecticut and several other states list it, and it appears on invasive registers up and down the east. What actually happens to you is a sales restriction where it is listed. The seedlings that come up 2 counties away are somebody else's problem. 17. Scotch broom. Bright yellow pea flowers packed along stiff green stems. No leaves worth mentioning, and a hillside covered in it in May. Looks genuinely spectacular. It was brought over deliberately as an ornamental, and then planted along highways for erosion control. The seed is why it is on lists. Broom pods dry in summer and split with an audible crack, throwing seed several yards, and that seed stays viable in soil for decades. A cleared site can regenerate from a seed bank laid down 30 years earlier. Washington, Oregon, California, and other western states listed as noxious and in some counties, landowners can be required to control it. What actually happens to you is that no legitimate nursery in those states will sell it. The stand on your boundary is yours to deal with, and dealing with it means the seed bank, not the plants. 16. Yellow flag iris. Sold for pond edges for a very long time, and it is a handsome thing. Sword leaves standing 4 feet, clear yellow flowers in early summer, and it will grow in standing water, where almost nothing else will. That tolerance is the problem. It forms dense mats that trap sediment and physically change the shape of a waterway, and the seed pods float. A plant in a garden pond becomes a plant in a ditch, becomes a plant in a river system, and the seeds ride the water the whole way. It is prohibited in a growing number of states, and it turns up on invasive lists across most of the country. What actually happens to you is a sales ban in listed states. If it is in your pond and your pond overflows anywhere, that is worth thinking about, because the seed does not need your permission. 15. Garlic mustard. Somebody brought this over as food. Crush a leaf, and it smells exactly like garlic, and it was grown in kitchen gardens by European settlers, who wanted a green that came up early. It is now among the most destructive woodland invaders in North America, and the mechanism is worth knowing. Garlic mustard releases compounds into the soil that interfere with the mycorrhizal fungi that tree seedlings depend on. It does not merely outcompete native plants, it degrades the ground underneath them, and the effect persists after the plant is pulled. A single flowering stem produces hundreds of seeds. Those seeds stay viable for years. Several states list it as noxious and prohibit sale, which is faintly absurd, given that nobody has needed to buy it since about 1870. It arrives on boots and tires now. What actually happens to you is a control obligation in a few places. Mostly what happens is that a woodland near you fills up with it, and the oaks stop coming. 14. Rosary pea. The seed is the reason anyone has ever heard of this plant. Roughly the size of a ladybird, glossy scarlet across most of its surface, with one black patch at the end where it attached to the pod. They look manufactured. People have strung them into rosaries, prayer beads, and tourist jewelry for centuries, which is where the name comes from, and why they keep turning up in luggage. Abris precatorius contains abrin, and abrin is more toxic by weight than ricin. A single seed, thoroughly chewed, has killed adults. The hard coat is what stands between the two facts. Swallowed whole, the seed usually passes through untouched, which is why necklaces circulated for generations. Without a body count, the danger arrives when somebody drills one to thread it and pricks a finger, or when a child bites through the shell. It is a federal noxious weed, and it has also naturalized across Florida and other warm states where it climbs and smothers. What actually happens to you is federal. Importing or moving it across a state line without a permit is an offense, and customs seizes the jewelry regularly at airports. 13. Water spinach. This one sits in a genuinely awkward place, and it is worth understanding because it shows how blunt these lists are. Ipomea aquatica is a staple vegetable across Southeast Asia and southern China. Hollow stems, arrow-shaped leaves, stir-fried with garlic in millions of kitchens every day. It grows in shallow water, and it grows fast. Fast is why it is a federal noxious weed in the United States. In warm, still water, it forms floating mats that block channels and strangle everything under them, and Florida has spent decades and considerable money on it. The result is a rule that lands unevenly. Some states operate permit schemes, so growers can produce it commercially under controlled conditions. Others prohibit it outright, and there have been enforcement actions against growers and markets. So the seed of an ordinary supermarket vegetable, sold openly one state over, can be contraband where you live. That is not a moral judgment about the plant. It is a judgment about your climate. 12. And this one is not a seed. It is the reason the title of this video is slightly misleading, and I would rather explain that than let you go on thinking the government has a list of seeds you personally are forbidden to put in the ground. Almost none of these rules are aimed at you. They are aimed at whoever sold you the packet. Seed law in America runs on 4 separate systems, and they do different things. The Federal Seed Act came first, back in the 30s, and it is a truth in labeling statute rather than a prohibition. It governs what a seed packet has to tell you: the species, the percentage that will germinate, the percentage that is inert filler, and critically, what weed seed is mixed in. It binds anyone shipping seed across a state line to sell it. It says nothing about your garden. The Federal Noxious Weed List is the serious one, run by USDA APHIS. Importing a listed species, or moving it between states without a permit, is a federal offense. Rosary pea and water spinach both sit here. Melaleuca and Kogon grass are coming up shortly. State noxious weed lists are the 3rd layer, and they are where most of this video actually lives. These prohibit sale, distribution, and new planting. Some go further and let a county order removal at your cost. Very few say anything about a packet already sitting in your shed. And then there is the route almost nobody knows exists. If you want to bring seed in from abroad legally, USDA runs a small lots of seed permit, a real, free, functioning scheme for small quantities, with rules about packet size, labeling, and what species qualify. People assume importing seed is simply forbidden. It is not. It is paperwork, and the paperwork is the difference between a legal shipment and one that gets destroyed at the border. So the useful question is never whether a seed is illegal in America. Ask which of those 4 applies, and whether it binds the seller, the shipper, or the person holding the trowel. Before the top 10, something worth pulling out of the 4 federal cases coming up. The seeds that carry the heaviest weight in American law are not the poisonous ones. Castor bean will kill a child, and it is barely regulated anywhere. Datura sends people to hospital every summer, and sits in mail-order catalogs. Meanwhile, a grass with no toxicity whatsoever, that nobody has ever been harmed by touching, carries federal prohibitions and a permit system. The register is not a danger list. It is an agriculture list, and what it protects is the crop, the pasture, and the waterway. A plant that threatens a person is a public health matter for somebody else's department. A plant that threatens a corn harvest is a federal case. 11. Kogon grass. Waist-high grass, pale green going coppery, with a distinctive silvery flower head like a cylindrical brush. If you saw it on a roadside, you would think it was ornamental, and in fact, a variety of it was sold as ornamental for years, under a trade name. It is routinely listed among the worst weeds on the planet, and there are 2 mechanisms behind that. The roots are sharp rhizomes that push through everything and form a mat nothing else penetrates, and it burns. Kogon grass carries fire hotter and faster than native grasses, which kills the pines around it and clears more ground for itself. Federal noxious weed, and it has taken hold across the Gulf states. What actually happens to you is federal, and this is one where states run active eradication rather than paperwork. 10. Tropical soda apple. A prickly shrub with large crinkled leaves, thorns on every surface including the leaf veins, and small fruits that look precisely like miniature watermelons before they ripen yellow. Cattle eat the fruit. That is the whole distribution system. The seed passes through, lands in a pasture in a pile of fertilizer, and comes up in a thicket that cattle then cannot walk through. A single plant produces tens of thousands of seeds. It reached Florida in the 80s and moved through the Southeast in cattle and in hay. Federal noxious weed, and states with cattle industries take it seriously enough to fund control programs. 9. Witchweed. Small, almost pretty, bright scarlet flowers on a plant a few inches high, and if you found it at the base of a corn stalk, you would probably leave it alone. Striga does not photosynthesize its way to a living. It attaches to the roots of its host underground and draws water and nutrients directly out of them, which is why the corn above it yellows and stunts, while the weed flowers cheerfully. Losses run to total crop failure. In the parts of Africa where it is endemic, the seed is dust, microscopic, produced in the tens of thousands per plant, and it can lie dormant in soil for a decade or longer, waiting for a chemical signal from a host root before it germinates at all. It turned up in the Carolinas in the 50s, and the federal and state response has been one of the longest-running eradication programs in American agriculture. Quarantine zones, soil testing, restrictions on moving equipment and produce out of infested land, decade after decade, because the seed bank outlasts everything. Federal noxious weed, genuinely one of the few plants where the phrase national security has been used without embarrassment. 8. Melaleuca, paperbark tea tree from Australia, peeling white bark in papery sheets, bottle brush flowers, and it drinks. That last part is exactly why it is here. In the early 20th century, when draining the Everglades was policy rather than scandal, Melaleuca was introduced deliberately to help dry the ground out. Seed was reportedly scattered from aircraft over the swamp. It worked. Then, it kept working. Melaleuca spread across hundreds of thousands of acres of South Florida, transforming open sawgrass marsh into closed forest that supports almost nothing native, and it releases seed in enormous quantities when stressed, so fire and cutting both make it worse. Federal noxious weed now, with control programs that have cost a great deal of public money. 7. And here is where I have to stop the list, because the most famous seed story in modern America belongs in it, and the ending is not the one most people remember. In the summer of 2020, thousands of Americans received seed packets they had not ordered, white envelopes with Chinese lettering, China postmarkings, and customs labels declaring the contents as jewelry. Reports came in from all 50 states. Florida alone logged over 600 in a matter of days. Every state agriculture department issued a warning. Do not plant these. Agencies collected them, and the speculation ran hot because the obvious reading was agricultural sabotage. USDA said from the first week that it had no evidence of anything other than a brushing scam, a scheme where a seller ships cheap, unsolicited goods to real addresses, so the resulting orders can carry verified reviews and lift a product's ranking. Then the testing came back. Mustard, cabbage, morning glory, mint, sage, rosemary, lavender, hibiscus and roses in the first 14 species identified, then broccoli, kale, tomato, celery, basil, coriander, sunflower. The agency's eventual conclusion was that there was no evidence anyone was trying to damage American agriculture. The largest seed panic in living memory was rosemary and cabbage, shipped to game an e-commerce review system. The warning was still the right one, and this matters. Any of those species arriving uninspected could have carried a pathogen or a contaminant seed, which is precisely what the import rules exist to catch. Being correct to worry and being correct about the cause are different things. 6. Salvia divinorum, a square-stemmed mint relative with soft green leaves, native to a small region of Oaxaca, where it has a long history of ceremonial use. It grows readily as a houseplant, and it rarely sets viable seed at all, so it moves as cuttings rather than packets. Federal law says nothing about it. There is no federal scheduling, and that gap left the states to decide individually, which they did, one at a time, mostly in a rush after it started appearing in videos online. In the mid-2000s, roughly half of them now control it in some form. Some as a Schedule I substance with full criminal penalties, some as a restricted plant, some with rules that apply only to sale or only to minors. So this plant is a felony matter on one side of a state line, and entirely unregulated on the other, with no federal rule to reconcile them. Very few substances in this country are governed that unevenly. What actually happens to you depends on your postcode and nothing else. 5. Iboga, a West African shrub with small clustered fruits and a root bark that has been central to Bwiti practice in Gabon for a very long time. Ibogaine, the principal alkaloid, sits on Schedule 1 in the United States, which makes cultivation a controlled substance matter, rather than an agricultural one. Growing the plant means possessing the compound. There is a second problem underneath the legal one, and it deserves saying. Demand from outside Africa has put serious pressure on wild iboga populations because harvesting the root bark generally means taking the whole plant, and the shrub is slow to reach a useful size. Gabon has moved to protect it as a national resource, so this is one where the American prohibition and the conservation argument point the same direction, which is not always the case on this list. 4. The seed with a number on the packet, not a species, a category, and it reaches more ordinary gardeners than anything else on this list. Look at the back of a packet for a line reading PVP, or plant variety protection, or a U.S. patent number. That variety is somebody's property, and saving seed from it to plant again is not permitted. 2 systems do this. Plant variety protection certificates cover seed-grown varieties, and traditionally allowed farmers to save seed for their own land. Utility patents cover the plant itself, and allow nothing of the kind. The Supreme Court settled the argument in 2013. An Indiana farmer named Vernon Bowman bought commodity soybeans from a grain elevator, cheap beans intended for feed, and planted them, reasoning that once a seed was sold, the patent was spent. Most of those beans happened to be patented herbicide-tolerant varieties because most soybeans are. The court ruled against him unanimously. The reasoning was that a seed is not an ordinary product. It makes copies of itself, so allowing a purchaser to plant and replant would leave the patent worthless after the first sale. What actually happens to you as a home gardener is nothing. Nobody is auditing a vegetable bed, but it explains something people find genuinely surprising, which is that heirloom and open-pollinated seed is not merely a taste preference. It is the seed you are permitted to save. 3. Dame's Rocket. Clusters of 4-petaled flowers, in purple, mauve, and white, standing 3 feet, scented in the evening. Most people who see it assume it is native phlox. Phlox has 5 petals. This has 4, and that single detail is the whole identification. It is prohibited in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and elsewhere, and listed as invasive across much of the Northeast and Midwest. And it is a standard component of commercial wildflower mixes, which is how it arrived nearly everywhere it grows. 2. Oxeye daisy. The white daisy on every roadside, in every meadow photograph. On the front of the packet, it is a listed noxious weed in Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, Washington, and other western states where it takes over rangeland, and cattle will not eat it. It is also in nearly every meadow mix sold in America. 1. And it is sitting in a garage or a garden center near you right now, with a photograph of a meadow on the front. The wildflower seed mix, sold at every hardware store, every supermarket garden aisle, every checkout in spring. Regional blend. Pollinator mix. Bay garden. Shake it over bare soil. Water it. Wait. Here is what turns this whole video around. The most restricted thing most Americans will ever plant is not on a federal register and did not arrive from anywhere exotic. It came in a shaker can for $11. Mixes are assembled from whatever bulk seed is cheap and germinates reliably, and the 2 species I just named are exactly that. Labeling requirements vary. Enforcement is thin, and a great many packets list nothing beyond a marketing phrase and a coverage area. Studies of commercial mixes have repeatedly turned up listed noxious species inside them, and gardeners scatter that over a lawn in perfect good faith. Nobody is coming to your house about it. That is not the point. The point is that every genuinely difficult plant in this country arrived because somebody planted it on purpose, believing it was harmless, usually on official advice or off a shelf. So the final test is the same one, running under all 20 items. Do not ask whether a seed is legal in America, Because there is no such thing as a national answer. Read what is actually in the packet. Then check it against your own state's noxious weed list, which is online, current, and takes about 4 minutes. Because the label on the front is marketing, and the species list on the back is the only part that has to be true. Everything on this video was sold to somebody, legally, by somebody, at the time, and the seeds that caused the most damage were never the frightening ones. If this made you want to turn a packet over and read the back, do me one small thing and like the video. It tells me to keep making these. And if you are not subscribed, that is where the next one lives. Then tell me down in the comments. What have you planted that you later found out you should not have? I read every single one. Last thing, and I mean it. I am not a lawyer. None of this is legal advice. And these lists are rewritten every year. Check your own states before you scatter anything this spring.